poor Waitress, was crying in the restaurant bathroom. What the mob boss does next will surprise you. Let me know what you thought of this story by giving it a score from 0 to 10 and comment what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you like my story and get to know you better. So subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The Thursday rain falls heavily on Fifth Avenue as Julian Costello watches the traffic through the window of Palazzo dei Fiori. The drops run down the glass like tears he has never allowed himself to shed, distorting the city lights into thousands of golden points dancing in the darkness. At 42, Julian carries on his shoulders an empire built on foundations most people prefer not to question. His Armani suit fits perfectly on a body he keeps strong through disciplined training, more out of necessity than vanity. In the world he lives in, showing any kind of weakness can cost you your life. He raises his glass of Barolo, inhaling the complex aroma of the drink, while his associates discuss the details of a new operation. Julian responds automatically, his mind wandering into territories he normally keeps locked away. It's been 3 years since his marriage to Valerie officially ended, although in practice it never really began. It was an agreement between families, a strategic move on the chessboard of New York's organized crime scene. She wanted the status and protection of the Costello name. He needed the alliance with her family. Neither of them pretended there was any love involved. When Valerie found a lover and asked for a divorce, Julian signed the papers without hesitation, feeling only an emptiness that money and power could never fill. That specific night, as his partners talk about roots and percentages, Julian finds himself thinking about how his life has become a predictable sequence of clandestine meetings, calculated decisions, and profound loneliness. He has known every face at that table for over a decade, trusts them with his life, but he can't say he truly knows them. He doesn't know their dreams, their deepest fears, what keeps them awake at night besides business. And they certainly don't know the real Julian, the one that exists beneath the layers of power and control. The sound cuts through his thoughts like a sharp blade. It's a muffled cry, trying to hide but failing miserably. It comes from the service area, that narrow hallway where employees store their belongings and where no clientele should be. Julian feels a strange, almost irritating curiosity. He is not a man to get involved in others' dramas, but something in that sound of restrained pain draws him in a way he can't explain. He stands up without offering any explanation, walking with measured steps towards the dimly lit hallway. The service area contrasts brutally with the opulence of the main dining room. Peeling walls, a smell of cleaning products mixed with food, and a flickering fluorescent light that should have been replaced weeks ago. It is there, sitting on the cold floor with her back against a metal locker, that he sees her for the first time. Isabella Hayes has her face hidden in her hands, her shoulders trembling with sobs she desperately tries to control. Her red hair falls in messy waves over her black and white waitress uniform, and when she finally lifts her face upon sensing his presence, Julian feels something stir in his chest. Her green eyes are swollen from crying, yet they maintain a fierce dignity that surprises him. She doesn't look away, doesn't apologize for being there, just stares at him with a mixture of vulnerability and strength he has never seen in anyone. For long seconds, they just look at each other. Julian notices the details unintentionally, the sauce stain on her sleeve, the short, clean nails, the thin chain around her neck with a small cross pendant. She notices in him the expensive elegance, the watch worth more than she would earn in 5 years, the dark eyes that seem to see right through people. Neither of them knows exactly what to say. It is Julian who breaks the silence, his voice coming out softer than he intended. He asks if she's okay, an obviously stupid question given the circumstances, but she responds with a nod that they both know is a lie. He takes a silk handkerchief from his pocket and offers it to her. Isabella hesitates, as if accepting this small gesture might put her in debt to a stranger, but finally extends her hand and takes the soft fabric, drying her face with delicate movements. Julian surprises himself by sitting on the floor next to her, something he hasn't done in decades, since before his life became what it is now. The floor is cold through the expensive fabric of his trousers, but he doesn't care. He stays there in silence, waiting, and then Isabella begins to speak, the words tumbling out in a broken stream of anger and frustration. She tells him about Robert Davies, about the unfair accusation, about the broken glass she didn't even touch, but which will cost her half the salary she desperately needs to pay for her mother's medicine. As she speaks, details of Isabella's life emerge like fragments of a mosaic. She mentions the 3 hours of public transport she endures every day, leaving home at 5 in the morning to get to her shift on time, returning almost at midnight. She talks about her mother, Carmen, who worked her whole life as a cleaner and now has heart problems that require expensive medication. She tells him about the younger brother she helped raise after their father died, who is now in college on a full scholarship, pride shining in her eyes even through her tears. Julian feels a fury growing inside him, controlled but intense. It's not just about the injustice itself, though that bothers him more than it should. It's the way they treated this woman, the way Robert humiliated someone who clearly already carries too much weight on her shoulders. Julian knows the type of man Robert is all too well. Petty tyrants who abuse what little power they have because deep down they know they are insignificant. Isabella finishes her story and turns her face to him, her eyes still shining with unshed tears. She asks why he is there, why a restaurant customer is sitting on the dirty floor next to a waitress he doesn't even know. Julian doesn't have an answer that makes sense, so he just tells the truth. He heard her crying and wanted to know if he could help. The simplicity of the answer seems to disarm Isabella, who lets out a short, bitter laugh, saying that no one can help, that she needs this job and will have to accept the injustice because she has no choice. It is then that Julian does something that will change both their lives forever. He tells her not to worry, that everything will be resolved. Isabella looks at him with suspicion, asking how he can be so sure, but he just smiles in a way that reveals nothing and gets up, extending a hand to help her. When their fingers touch, it's as if an electric current passes between them. Isabella feels it and Julian feels it, but neither comments. Before leaving, Julian stops and turns. He asks for her name and she replies, Isabella Hayes. He repeats the name softly, as if committing it to memory, and then just says that he is Julian. He doesn't give his last name, offers no more information. Isabella stands there, holding the silk handkerchief and watching him disappear down the hall, feeling that something fundamental has just changed, but unable to define exactly what. When Julian returns to the table where his associates are still discussing business, everyone notices the change in his expression. Michael, his right-hand man for 15 years, raises a questioning eyebrow. But Julian just shakes his head subtly. There is a different tension in him now, a determination that the men around the table recognize as dangerous. They don't know that the threat is not directed at them, but at an insignificant manager who made the mistake of crossing someone Julian has decided to protect. The next day, Robert Davies arrives at the palazzo and is met by the restaurant's owner, Salvatore Benedetti, who, with a stone-faced expression, informs him that his services are no longer required. Robert tries to protest, to argue, but Salvatore cuts off any attempt with a coldness that makes it clear the decision is final and non-negotiable. Later, when Robert tries to access his bank accounts, he discovers they have all been frozen for alleged tax irregularities that will take months to resolve. His carefully constructed life begins to crumble in a matter of hours. Meanwhile, Isabella is called to Salvatore's office. She enters expecting the worst, thinking she will be fired along with Robert, but instead receives news that leaves her completely stunned. She has been promoted to main dining room supervisor with a salary that is 3 times what she earned before and benefits that include health insurance for her and her mother. Salvatore explains that the quality of her work has been noticed and that the restaurant needs dedicated people like her in leadership positions. Isabella can hardly believe what she is hearing. She accepts the promotion in a state of shock, thanks him repeatedly, and leaves the office with her legs feeling weak. When she finally manages to process what happened, her mind immediately goes back to the man in the hallway, to Julian. It can't be a coincidence. The way he said everything would be resolved, the certainty in his voice, and now this. But how? Who is he really? That night, Isabella can barely sleep. She lies next to her mother in the bed they share, in the small 2-room apartment in Queens, listening to Carmen's irregular breathing, thinking about how that salary increase will change everything. They can buy the medicine without sacrificing food. She can finally fix the shower that has been leaking for 6 months, maybe even save a little for an emergency. But along with the gratitude comes a restlessness, a feeling of owing something to someone she barely knows, of having entered a transaction whose terms were not explicit. She turns in the narrow bed, careful not to wake her mother, and her thoughts inevitably return to Julian. There is something about him that deeply intrigues her, a contradiction between his impeccable elegance and that moment of vulnerability in the hallway. The way he sat on the dirty floor without hesitation, as if in that instant nothing mattered more than being there with her. Isabella has spent her whole life being invisible to people like him, and suddenly she was seen, truly seen, in a way that still takes her breath away when she thinks about it. She discovers part of the answer the following week, when Julian returns to the palazzo and specifically asks to be served by her. Isabella approaches his table with a racing heart, trying to maintain professional composure as he looks at her with that discreet smile she is already beginning to recognize. He asks how she is, how the new position is, and Isabella can no longer contain her curiosity. She asks him directly if he had anything to do with her promotion. Julian neither denies nor confirms, just says that sometimes things work out the way they should have from the beginning. Isabella wants to be annoyed by the evasion, but she can't. There's something in the way he looks at her, with an intensity that makes her feel seen in a way she's never experienced before. She takes his order, a filet with a Madeira sauce and another bottle of that Barolo he seems to enjoy. And as she walks away, she feels his eyes following her every move. This becomes a pattern. Julian starts frequenting the palazzo 2, then 3 times a week, always asking for her table, always staying until the end of her shift. They talk during the brief moments Isabella can stop at his table, seemingly casual exchanges about life, about New York City, about everything and nothing at the same time. Julian learns that Isabella grew up in Queens, that she lost her father at 10 in a work accident, that her mother worked as a cleaner her whole life to raise her alone. Isabella learns that Julian also lost his parents early, though he doesn't go into detail about how, that he never allowed himself to have hobbies or interests beyond work, that he carries a kind of loneliness she recognizes because it's just like hers. During one of these conversations on a particularly quiet night at the restaurant, Julian asks about her dreams. Isabella stops, the tray balanced in her hand, surprised by the intimacy of the question. She never had the luxury of dreaming too big, but she admits she always wanted to study, maybe go to business school, have her own business one day. Julian listens with an attention she is not used to receiving, and when she finishes speaking, he simply says he sees no reason why those dreams can't become a reality. The conviction in his voice makes her believe, even for a moment, that maybe he is right. The attraction between them grows like a wildflower, impossible to ignore or control. Isabella finds herself thinking about him at the most inopportune moments, remembering the way he smiles when she says something that amuses him, the sound of his deep voice, the sense of protection she feels when she's near him. Julian, for his part, finds himself counting the days until he can see her again, planning his commitments around the nights at the palazzo. Feeling something he hadn't felt in so long, he had almost forgotten its name. Hope. But the truth has a cruel way of revealing itself. One night, Julian is meeting with 3 men at a reserved table in the corner of the restaurant. The conversation is low, intense, and although Isabella can't hear the words, she recognizes the body language. She recognizes the kind of tension in the air, the way everyone at the table constantly checks who is nearby, the hand of one of the men resting on what is clearly a gun under his jacket. Isabella feels her blood run cold when one of the men calls Julian boss, when another mentions a shipment that needs to be moved, when they all stand up and she realizes the deference with which they treat the man she is falling for. Later that night, when the others have left and Julian is alone at his table, she approaches with trembling hands. She needs to know. She needs to hear it from him. Julian sees the change in her immediately. He knows that look, that mixture of fear and disappointment he has seen on so many faces throughout his life. He could lie, invent a plausible story, but something in him refuses to do that to her. When Isabella asks who he really is, Julian answers with brutal honesty. He says he is Julian Costello, that his family has been in the crime business for 3 generations, that he commands operations ranging from smuggling to money laundering, that the legal companies are just a front for something much darker. He sees the impact of his words on her face, each revelation landing like a physical blow, but he continues, because if he is going to lose her, he would rather it be for the whole truth than for a half-truth that would leave her always wondering. He tells her how he took over the family business at 23 after his father was murdered in a turf war. How he built alliances through strategic marriage and carefully calculated intimidation. How his hands became stained with blood because in his world, showing mercy is an invitation to be destroyed. Isabella listens to everything in silence, feeling the ground disappear from under her feet. She wants to run, wants to never see this man again, but at the same time, she can't reconcile the Julian in front of her, vulnerable and honest for perhaps the first time in his life, with the criminal he just described. She asks if he has ever killed someone, and Julian doesn't look away when he answers yes, that his hands are not clean, that he has done things he is not proud of, but that seem necessary at the time. His voice carries a weight when he explains that he never hurt innocents, that there is a code he follows even in the lawless world he lives in. But he acknowledges that this doesn't absolve him, that choices were made and consequences were accepted. Isabella sees something in his eyes that paralyzes her, a regret so deep it seems to have roots in his soul. It's not an excuse, not a justification. It's just the raw, naked truth of who he is and what he has become. Isabella walks away from that conversation feeling torn apart. For days, she avoids Julian, refuses to wait on his table when he shows up, asks for shift changes so she doesn't have to see him. Julian accepts the rejection in silence, but he doesn't stop coming to the palazzo, doesn't stop trying to meet her gaze across the room, doesn't give up. And Isabella, despite everything, can't stop thinking about him. It is Carmen who forces her daughter to face the situation. Isabella's mother, a small woman with an indomitable spirit, notices her daughter's torment and sits with her in the small living room of their cramped apartment. Carmen knows the world, knows the harshness of life in the outer boroughs, knows good men who did bad things out of necessity and bad men who hide behind respectable facades. She tells Isabella that the question isn't what Julian did in the past, but who he chooses to be now, and more importantly, who he chooses to be with her. Carmen tells her daughter about Isabella's own father, about secrets she never revealed before. How he, desperate to feed his family, briefly got involved with smuggling at the Brooklyn docks. How the guilt consumed him until he found the courage to leave, taking honest work, even though it paid less. How he died in a work accident precisely because he chose the harder but more correct path. The revelation shocks Isabella, but it also makes her see that the world is not as black and white as she had imagined. Isabella reflects on her mother's words during sleepless nights. She thinks about all the conversations she had with Julian, the genuine kindness he showed, the way he treats her with a respect and consideration she rarely received from men with perfectly legal professions. She thinks about how he changed her life with a simple gesture, how he never asked for anything in return, how his eyes seem more alive when they are talking than at any other time. The reconciliation happens on a rainy night, echoing the first time they met. Isabella finishes her shift and finds Julian waiting outside the restaurant, the rain soaking his expensive suit as he stands there, as if he doesn't care in the slightest. She approaches him without knowing exactly what she will say, but when their eyes meet, words become unnecessary. Julian just says he's sorry, that he understands if she never wants to see him again, but that he needed her to know that he loves her, that he has never loved anyone like he loves her, that she made him want to be a better person. Isabella doesn't respond with words. She takes a step forward and kisses him right there in the rain, feeling his hands tremble as they pull her close, tasting the tears she didn't know she was shedding. It is a kiss that carries months of unresolved tension, of repressed desire, of two lonely souls finally finding a safe harbor in each other. When they finally separate, they both know there is no turning back, that they have chosen to move forward together despite all the reasons not to. The relationship that develops from that night is intense and complicated. Julian introduces Isabella to his world gradually, never exposing her to anything truly dangerous, but being honest about the reality of his life. Isabella meets the men who work for him, sees the respect and loyalty he inspires, begins to understand that his world isn't as black and white as she had imagined. She sees Julian helping families of employees who are struggling, sees him refusing jobs that would harm innocents, sees the code of honor he follows religiously, even in a lawless world. Michael, Julian's right-hand man, is the first to really get to know Isabella. He watches the transformation in his boss with a mixture of admiration and concern. In a frank conversation with Isabella, while Julian is in a meeting, Michael tells stories about the man she is getting to know. How Julian took command when he was little more than a boy, how he had to make impossible choices to keep everyone alive, how he never betrayed the trust of someone who was loyal to him. Michael sees in Isabella something he always knew Julian needed, someone who sees him as a man first and a boss second. But their happiness is fragile, built on foundations that could crumble at any moment. Dante Thorne is everything Julian is not. A cruel man with no scruples, who sees people as disposable tools, who has always envied Julian's empire and influence. When Dante discovers their relationship, he sees not just a weakness to exploit, but a perfect revenge. The kidnapping of Carmen happens on a normal Tuesday afternoon. The woman is returning from the market when a van stops beside her and men drag her inside before she can scream. Isabella receives a call at work, Dante's voice cold and calculating, telling her exactly what she must do if she wants to see her mother alive again. She must spy on Julian, provide information about his business, his roots, his contacts, and she cannot tell him about the kidnapping, or Carmen dies immediately. Isabella lives through the worst nightmare of her life. She tries to keep up appearances with Julian, but he knows her too well not to notice that something is terribly wrong. He sees the fear in her eyes, the way she jumps at any sudden noise, the dark circles that betray sleepless nights. When he finally confronts her, Isabella breaks down and tells him everything, sobbing in his arms as she apologizes for having doubted him, for not having trusted him from the beginning. Julian feels a fury like he has never felt before. Not just for Dante's audacity in attacking someone he loves, but for the pain they caused Isabella, for the fear she had to carry alone. He gathers his most trusted men, mobilizes all the resources he has, and plans a rescue operation that is risky to the point of insanity. Isabella begs to go with him, but Julian flatly refuses. He will not put her life at risk, no matter how much she insists. The wait is agonizing. Isabella stays at Julian's apartment, a safe place with discreet but present guards, while he leaves for the rescue. She paces back and forth, unable to sit, unable to do anything but pray. Michael stays with her, offering words of comfort that sound empty even as he says them. He has seen many operations like this, knows the risk is real, that men might not come back, but he trusts Julian in a way that goes beyond logic, a loyalty forged through years of battles won together. The rescue takes place in an abandoned warehouse in the East Bronx, a territory that used to be neutral, but that Dante had taken for himself through violence and intimidation. Julian enters with only 5 men, knowing Dante has at least twice that weighting, but trusting in the skill and loyalty of his team. The operation is swift and brutal. Julian finds Carmen tied to a chair, frightened but alive, and covers her with his own body when the shooting starts. The confrontation between Julian and Dante is visceral. Dante expected Julian to come alone, too proud to ask for help, but he underestimated his rival's intelligence. When it becomes clear that he is losing, Dante tries to use Carmen as a shield, but Julian is already moving. A precise shot that neutralizes the threat without endangering the woman. Dante falls to the warehouse floor, his arrogance finally costing him the price he should have always paid. Julian takes Carmen directly to Isabella, who is waiting outside the warehouse against all his orders. When mother and daughter embrace, both crying with relief, Julian feels something break inside him. He killed Dante, avenged the offense against the people he loves, but looking at Isabella holding her mother, he realizes he can't keep living like this. He can't keep exposing her to this danger, to this world of violence where any moment of happiness can be destroyed by a rival thirsty for revenge. It is Carmen, surprisingly, who initiates the change. In the days following the rescue, recovering at home with Isabella caring for her, Carmen talks at length with Julian. She thanks him for saving her life, but makes it clear that she cannot bless her daughter's relationship with a man who lives in crime. Not out of moralism, she explains, but because she doesn't want to see Isabella living in constant fear, never knowing if he will come home, raising children in a world where violence is always a possibility. Julian listens in silence, knowing she is right. He always knew, but he is finally ready to admit it. When he promises Carmen that he will find a way out, she surprises him by saying she believes him. She saw who he really is during those terrible hours, saw a man willing to risk everything to protect the people he loves. And she believes that this man can choose a different path. The transition is neither easy nor quick. Julian spends months carefully planning how to disentangle himself from the criminal operations without arousing suspicion or creating a power vacuum that could lead to a war. He promotes his right-hand man, Michael, who has been with him for 15 years, and gradually transfers control of the illicit operations. At the same time, he focuses all his energy on the legitimate businesses, the construction companies, the import firms, the restaurants. The process of leaving is more complex than Julian anticipated. There are tense meetings with other bosses, delicate negotiations over territories and percentages, moments when it seems everything will collapse into violence. But Julian navigates each obstacle with the same strategic intelligence that built his empire. He offers concessions where necessary, stands firm where it is crucial, and slowly creates a structure where his absence does not cause chaos. Isabella becomes more than just emotional support in this process. She has a sharp mind for business, an unparalleled work ethic, and a way of dealing with people that perfectly complements Julian's more direct style. She suggests changes in the companies that increase efficiency and profitability, implements employee benefit programs that boost loyalty and reduce turnover, and brings a perspective Julian never had because he never really had to care about legitimate profits before. Together, they transform the front companies into genuinely profitable operations. The construction company begins to win real contracts based on quality and competitive pricing, not intimidation. The import firm develops legitimate trade relationships with international suppliers. The Palazzo and other restaurants in the chain begin to be recognized for their excellence, not their connection to organized crime. They face judgment from all sides. Julian's former partners see his exit as betrayal, rivals see it as weakness, and authorities don't believe the change is real. Isabella loses friends who can't accept her relationship with a former criminal, faces judgmental stares on the street, hears whispers whenever she enters a room. But they persist, united by a love that grows stronger with every obstacle overcome. There are moments of doubt, nights when Julian questions if he can really leave the past behind, if he will ever be seen as anything other than what he was. Days when Isabella wonders if she is being naive, if she is putting too much faith in a man who has done terrible things. But they always find their way back to each other, always remember why they chose this difficult path instead of the easy way out of simply giving up. On a particularly difficult night, after a tense meeting where a former partner threatened Julian for his desertion, they sit together on the terrace of his apartment. Julian is silent, the weight of his choices pressing on his shoulders. Isabella takes his hand and says something he will carry forever. She tells him that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing the right thing despite the fear. That she is proud of him, not for what he was, but for what he is becoming. That every day he chooses to be better is a victory no one can take from them. The transformation in both is profound. Julian learns to be vulnerable, to share his fears and insecurities, to ask for help when he needs it. He discovers that strength isn't just about control and intimidation, but about the courage to change, to admit mistakes, to build instead of destroy. Isabella, in turn, finds a strength she never knew she possessed. She who always saw herself as just another waitress from the outer boroughs discovers she can command boardrooms, negotiate with executives, and manage companies. 2 years after that rainy night in the Palazzo's bathroom, Julian books the same reserved table where they had so many conversations. The restaurant is empty, closed especially for them, with candles illuminating the entire room. Isabella enters, dressed simply but elegantly, knowing something special is happening, but not knowing exactly what. Julian is waiting, and when she sits down, he takes her hand across the table. He talks about how she saved his life, not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. He talks about how she taught him to live instead of just exist, to love instead of just protect, to have hope instead of just survive. And then he kneels beside the table, holding a box with a ring that belonged to his mother, and asks if she will spend the rest of her life showing him how to be the man she deserves. Isabella doesn't hesitate. She says yes before he even finishes the question, kneeling on the floor beside him and kissing him as tears stream down both their faces. They are tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude for having found each other when they needed it most. The wedding takes place 3 months later in the small St. Jude's parish in her Queens neighborhood, the same church where Isabella was baptized, where she had her first communion, where she prayed countless times beside her mother. It is a simple ceremony, with modest flowers and humble decorations, but packed with people who truly matter. Carmen is in the front row, healthy and smiling thanks to the treatment she can finally afford, tears of happiness running down her face as she watches her daughter walk to the altar. Michael is there, representing Julian's past, but also his future, a reminder that change and redemption are possible. The employees from the palazzo are there, along with workers from the construction and import companies, people whose lives Julian touched in small and large ways. It is not a high society New York wedding. There are no famous photographers or exclusive guest lists. It is a real wedding, with real people celebrating a love that overcame obstacles that seemed impossible. When the priest asks if Julian takes Isabella as his wife, he answers with a firm voice that echoes through the small church. When he asks if Isabella takes Julian, she says yes with such conviction that there is no doubt left in anyone's mind. They exchange rings with hands that tremble slightly, not from fear but from pure emotion. The kiss that seals their marriage is different from all the others they have shared. It carries the promise of a future, the complete acceptance of the past, and the celebration of a present they built together through difficult choices and unwavering love. When they finally separate and turn to face their guests, they are both smiling in a way no one who knew them before had ever seen. The reception is simple but joyous, with live music from a local soul band, plentiful food prepared by Isabella's aunts, and dancing until the early hours. Julian, who has never danced in his life, lets Isabella guide him across the makeshift dance floor, while everyone claps and laughs. Carmen dances with Michael, two people from completely different worlds, finding common ground in the happiness they share for the newlyweds. When the night ends and the last guests have gone, Julian and Isabella stand alone at the church entrance. The moon illuminates the quiet neighborhood street, so different from Fifth Avenue, where they met but infinitely more meaningful. Julian looks at the woman he chose to spend his life with and sees not just the waitress who cried in the restaurant bathroom, but a partner, an equal, someone who challenged him to be better and then stood by him through the entire journey of transformation. Isabella looks at the man who knelt before her and sees not the criminal he was, but the man he chose to become. She sees someone who proved that redemption is possible, that love can transform, that it's never too late to choose a different path. She sees the father he will be to the children they plan to have, the husband he is already becoming, the man who risked everything for her not once, but several times. They get into the car that will take them on their simple, planned honeymoon, a week at a small inn on the coast where no one knows them, and they can just be a couple in love. But before leaving, Isabella asks Julian to stop the car for a moment. She looks out the window at the church, at the neighborhood where she grew up, at the lights beginning to turn on in the windows of neighbors waking up for another day of work. She thinks about how much her life has changed since that rainy night, how a single conversation with a stranger in a dark hallway completely altered her trajectory. She thinks of her mother sleeping peacefully without worrying about medical bills, of having found not just love but purpose, of having helped a man find redemption while she herself discovered her own strength. Julian watches Isabella's face illuminated by the first light of dawn and feels a peace he never imagined possible. For 42 years he lived in a world of violence and fear, building walls around his heart that he believed were impenetrable. And then she appeared, shattering them all with her authenticity, her courage, her unconditional love that demanded he be better but never gave up when he stumbled. They drive on as the sun rises over New York City, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city that witnessed so much of their pain and struggle now watches their new beginning. It is a city of contrasts, where wealth and poverty coexist side by side, where people from completely different worlds can meet in a restaurant hallway and change everything. Their story is not a fairy tale. Julian still carries the scars of his past, still has nightmares sometimes about things he did and cannot undo. Isabella still faces judgment from people who think they know who she is based on where she came from. They still argue, still have hard days, still face challenges that test their relationship. But they chose each other, not in spite of their flaws, but recognizing that no one is perfect. They chose to build something real based on honesty and mutual respect. They chose to believe that love is stronger than prejudice, that transformation is possible, that two determined people can overcome any obstacle the world puts in their way. Years later, when they tell their story to their children, they will leave out the darkest details but will keep the essence. They will talk about how true love requires courage, about how it's worth fighting for what is right even when it seems impossible, about how two people from opposite worlds can meet and create something completely new together. And when their children ask how they knew it was true love, Julian will look at Isabella and answer that it was when he realized he would rather completely change his life than live without her. Isabella will squeeze his hand and add that it was when she realized he was willing to transform, not because she asked, but because he wanted to be worthy of the love they shared. This is the truth of their story. It is not about a powerful man saving a helpless woman, nor about a woman redeeming a sinner. It is about two equally broken people who found each other at the right moment, recognized something precious in one another, and decided to do the hard work of building something lasting. It's about choice. Julian's choice to leave the path that seemed inevitable. Isabella's choice to see beyond what the world said Julian was. The choice of both to face judgment, fear, and doubt because they believed what they had was worth any sacrifice. And in the end, it's about love. Not the easy, superficial love of movies, but the real, complicated love that exists in the imperfect world. The love that requires daily work, that survives storms because both people refuse to give up, that grows stronger with every obstacle overcome together. Julian and Isabella built that love on foundations that seemed impossible, in a world that said it would never work, against all odds. And it worked not because it was easy, but because they were both willing to do whatever it took to make it work. They found each other on that rainy night in a dimly lit hallway of a sophisticated restaurant. She was crying and broken. He was empty and lost. And together, they built something that neither of them could have built alone. They built a home, a family, a life that is a testament to the transformative power of true love. This is the story of how two lost souls found each other in the darkness and decided to be each other's light. It is the story of redemption, transformation, and the proof that it is never too late to choose a different path. It is the story of Julian and Isabella, and it is a love story in the truest sense of the word. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.